Okay. So one thing I'm going to look at today is of the ancestry of Cain. This is important because we're going to determine if the ancestry of Cain is of the line of Adam. Is he an Adamite? Now, this has differentiated from the mainstream Christian church, which has put this stamp or seal upon Cain as being of the line of the serpent. And I was having this discussion yesterday with some of my roommates on this topic, that one of the main doctrines that has infiltrated the church was the serpent seed doctrine. And this was the doctrine that it began in the 19th century. And that specifically says that the serpent had sex with Eve and fostered Cain, that Adam would not be the legitimate heir, and then Cain would not have descended from the line of Adam, but from the serpent. I looked into that, and I don't buy it. So when we ask the AI, let's look at here. What is the origin of the serpent seed doctrine? So, the religious belief that originated early Christianity, which teaches that the devil is the father of Cain and that his seed was passed through the generations, is believed on a literal interpretation of the Bible, specifically Genesis 3:15, which states, "And I'll put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." So this interpretation was used to suggest that the serpent seed is a reference to the offspring of the devil. Now, this is a 19th century projection of the devil and Satan onto the line of Cain. Now, we look at some of the pre-Sumerian texts, which it attributes that Cain comes from Adam. Adam knew his wife, and two sons were born. Twins, Cain and Abel. Adam in the Sumerian text was called Adamo, and Eve was known as Titi. Twin sons were born, Cain and Abel, the firstborns. Oh, as we know the story, Cain slays Abel and then is exiled into the land of Nod, where he's given a mark and brandished to protect him from the savages. Now, the mainstream doctrine that is flourishing through Christianity today is that the devil or the serpent tempted Eve. My question is, where does that doctrine originate from? Where does the devil come into this picture? Because it was not based in the Sumerian texts. It was not based in the original mythology. And it can even be said that the Canaanites, the ones that the Israelites exerted their authority over, were the original descendants of Cain. Now, I've got my theories and my hypothesis on it, but my point of this analogy here is to reestablish Cain being in the line of Adam. So, understanding the history of Cain is going to be important for understanding where we are. Because the lineage of Cain, we have to go to the story. So the earliest reference we have is that you have the Nodite deity Enki of the Nodite race. This is the Nodites who established Dalmatia in the Persian Gulf, the area of Mesopotamia. So he decides that he wants to have a civilized culture for shepherding and raising agriculture, raising sheep for shelter, for food, for wool, clothing, grains and waterways, canals being built, a civilization that can think and spawn its ideas. This is the Enki whose symbol was the serpent, and whose primary region of dominion was ancient Egypt, separate from Mesopotamia. This is where they had their own language, and they had their own name of their land. It was Chem. And this race, led by Enki, decides to have civilized man by offering his genetic seed unto the evolutionary races. So the evolutionary races receive this, and he sees two women bathing in the water. The first primitive man, and he mates with both these women, and we give rise to Adamu and Titi. These are the biblical Adam and Eve. Uh, Adamu becomes educated under the serpent Lord Enki, Lord of the Waters. And knowing and having intercourse with his wife, he begets twins. These are Cain and Abel. And Cain and Abel, it's Cain is given lordship over the field and agriculture, and Abel is given governance over shepherding and cattle raising. And as the first shepherds, they get into a dispute. Cain slays Abel, as you know the story, and Cain is exiled. He's exiled to a foreign land, where it says he's gone to the land of Nod. Land of Nod would be in this area to the east. This would be to the east of the Caspian Sea, where the Nodite culture begins, northern Iran and northern Afghanistan, northern Swat Valley. There's a lot of ancient culture. You're familiar with the Buddhist traditions, like with Padmasambhava. The famous 7-line prayer is that Om in the northwest to the land of Uddiyana. The northwest of India would be this present day Swat Valley. Here's India, and to the northwest, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and the Caspian Sea. The northern Afghanistan and Swat Valley. Now we want to give the story of the sons of God coming unto the daughters of men. These are the stories of the watchers throughout history, coming down, and these Nodites in the land of Nod intermingling and taking the daughters of men, who are the most prominent and superior stock of the human race, were the Adamites, who are the descendants of the Lord Enki, of the serpent. Cain, being an Adamite, is coming from the serpent race as well. And our understanding that this symbol of the serpent, it's in relation to the father principle, that the serpent represents that energy and our roots and our ancestors. And it was only recently in history when these descendants, through the Roman Empire, they didn't want anything that was not Roman culture or the Roman Catholic Church to be pressed. So this doctrine of the Gospels became the propaganda that Adam is the first man. And it negates even lines in the Bible where it would say that Cain, having been exiled, goes east to the land of Nod. If Adam was the first man, where did the land of Nod come from in the Nodite culture? And such the established principles and practices of the Nodite culture, such as the inheritance of the firstborn son, marriage traditions of husband and wife, having a legal wife and spouse, the family culture, the inheritance of passing down the father's inheritance unto his children, the written alphabet and spoken language. We forget that this culture was there in the very beginning, even in Mesopotamia. And the point of this is to connect this dots that Cain, which is where we get an etymology Canaanite, come from this line of Adam. And that group that formulated in the 19th century that claimed that there were descendants in the Americas that descend from the 12 lost tribes, that wouldn't be too far from facts if the seafaring race of the Aryans, which intermingled with the Adamites, had a seafaring culture that traveled through the coastal ways. In Florida, the Persian Gulf, in this area that looks like a crescent. We forget many of the cultures in Mexico, Yucatan, Guatemala, such as the Olmecs, the rubber people that were born here, where we see their remains and giant statues of their heads. And we see a distinct mark in these cultures and in this ancestry of Cain, which I think in this day and age deserves its place, not as something that's demonized, but as coming from Adam's race. And it was the mark, the symbol that was given unto Cain in his lineage of a distinct mark of a lack of facial hair. So we see this within the Olmecs. And in their culture, you don't see any Olmec with a long beard. But you do see stories of the white bearded man from across the seas coming to the Yucatan or Mexico from a faraway land. A land that's shrouded in mystery and now is just desert and remains. Where is it now? All we have is this history and this story that's left. And these events, and for instance, Mauritania, where you get the name Moors, this race was said to be bearded. And intermingles with the locals and the natives. And there's so much shrouded here in mystery that I can only speculate at this point. But the evidence of the lost tribes being in the Americas, I would say that aspect of the serpent seed doctrine can be true. But the aspect of the serpent seed doctrine that presupposes that any descendant of Cain comes from not the line of Adam, but Satan or the devil or the serpent, who is evil and doesn't have the good intentions for the species of mankind, that I don't agree with. I think there's evidence of the serpent culture whose symbol was the swastika being beneficial to the world. And I think there's also been a culture that has suppressed it. And this study is a discourse and to kind of bring back some of these lost stories, and we'll be getting into this further. You stay tuned. All right, that's it for today. Enjoy. You can subscribe and